Good afternoon, beautiful people. Welcome to another episode of Kiko's Freethinkers Forum. Believe it or not, we're at episode 118, and we're joined by a very special guest. His name is Marc James Léger, and he is from Montreal, Canada. He's based in Montreal, Canada. He's an independent scholar. He's been an independent scholar since 2006. He got his PhD in visual and cultural studies at the University of Rochester. We have a lot to discuss today. We're going to discuss two of his books. These aren't his only publications, but we're going to emphasize these two books in particular: Too Black to Fail, The Obama Portraits and the Politics of Post-Representation, and Bernie Bros Gone Woke. The full title is Class Identity Neoliberalism. So two intriguing titles there themselves. And he has quite a bit of other works that we probably will mention during the course of the discussion. But I just wanted to say this is his first time on the show. Episode 118 is set to be a great episode. And we appreciate you coming on to our show, Dr. Léger.
Thanks very much, Kiko. And it's a pleasure for me to be on your show and to be on a YouTube channel where I could present some of this material about two books that have, I wrote them so that they could have some sort of influence on American elections. A Canadian guy. So it's great for me to have this on YouTube where people can see the or hear me talk about this and maybe consider some of the ideas that I'm working on in relation to electoral politics on the one hand, but more the bigger question is the relationship between class and identity. And so these two books are about how the interaction between these issues affected both elections. It just so happens that with the Obama Portraits book, I focus on the portraits, but generally speaking, that's the area that I'm working on.
That's very interesting that you said that, because off camera you discussed the photographic aspect of the Obama book versus the Bernie Bros book. But as a literary critic, I was really intrigued by the textual information in the Obama book too. Although I do agree that the Bernie book, there was more of I'm not going to say that there's more argumentation, but there's definitely more emphasis on the textual. But I would say this much: there would definitely be points where I would need clarifications, because you mentioned it yourself. You're from Canada, and I just thought that your analysis from that point of view was interesting, because we have some points of contention, but overall, I thought both books were well written. I was impressed by the analysis. I thought it was quite intersectional in the way you took it, just from historical standpoint, all the research you did. You used such a theoretical background, which I thought was kind of cool. I thought you did a great job of explaining that, especially in the Obama chapter of the postmodern phenomena, all this type of stuff that may be difficult for a general audience to understand. And so I may need some clarifications on that, and also the terminologies in the context that you're using some of these terms like white supremacy, racism. I think those things aren't as simple as they seem on the surface within the context of the book. If we're talking about politics, if we're talking about neoliberalism, if we're talking about fascism, I need to have clarification on some of that within this context that we're discussing. But I'm sure that you would do that. And I greatly appreciate you coming on to the show. And just a slight ad before we start: we have a lot of people in the audience. About 8 to 9% of our audience is actually based in Canada. Overall, 43% of our audience is located outside of the United States. Kiko's Freethinkers Forum is a YouTube exclusive channel. We did that because people do prefer the videos, and that accommodates different audiences. And so I want to say thanks to all the people in the audience and to all my guests, past, present, and future. And I just want to say, give us a chance, give independent media a chance. I think there's a tendency to just subscribe to just the shiny object. And we may not be as shiny, but if you dig into that information, you're going to get a lot of valuable information, I think, that will benefit your personal life and you spread that to your friends and family, tell them about our channel, Kiko's Freethinkers Forum, remember you can't unthink free thought. And that's all we're trying to do here. We're not trying to change everyone's mind. We're trying to get you to develop your own analytical processes to where you can come to certain conclusions and avoid the binarisms that we tend to see in the mainstream media. We're very anti-mainstream media. We're an alternative to mainstream media. We don't use reactions to mainstream media stories. We don't do that. We create our own content here, and we hopefully think that that can attract different people. Have culture, have politics. I think a healthy dose of both is good. Global, local, and national perspectives. Let's get started with this conversation. And before we even get to the slides, because Dr. Léger have a lot of slides to share with us, and I'm probably going to be asking him a ton of questions while he shares the slides, which is totally fine. You say you're an independent scholar since '06. What does that entail? I know you discussed this in your Bernie Bros Gone Woke book, but can you give the audience an impression of what makes an independent scholar different from just a university professor teaching classes all the time? What are the pros and cons to being an independent scholar?
Well, some things are not uh, uh, of your own choosing, right? So I'm not an independent scholar by choice. I would be, teaching university if I could. That was, my goal setting out, and that's, I believe, my calling is to be a teacher. And so things didn't work out for me in academia for various reasons. So I've been working as an independent scholar. And, so obviously the advantage is that you have all the time you want for research, right? So, professors, I'm sometimes amazed that professors get so much work published. And of course, there's pressure to publish, right? And a lot of universities, you have to report to your dean at the end of the year and let them know if you've published articles or books. And in the past, if you were faculty, you may have published one or two books in your entire career, and that book sort of defined your work. And you didn't get around to publishing it until you were absolutely, sure you had covered all the bases. So nowadays, it's a more sort of kind of a marketing orientation where you can say, we have this faculty and they're widely known because they've published all of these books and so on. So there's a lot of pressure on faculty to, on the one hand, quote unquote, perform, right? Like publish work. And then at the same time, you have, you have a teaching load, you have like, community service to the community in the faculty, in the school, and so on. So, obviously the advantage of being an independent scholar is that you can work, at your leisure, basically, as like if you were a billionaire, people say, if you had $1 million, what would you like to do? You could be a man of letters, quote unquote, and spend your time working on whatever you like. So I have that advantage, but at the same time, you don't have the collegial environment. You don't have the same kind of response to your work. Your work, you can sometimes feel like you're a voice in the woods. You're kind of like every once in a while you come out of the forest and you say, "Oh, here I have something." But I mean, I've been fortunate. I've published a lot, and I've interacted with a lot of colleagues over the years, so they know my work. And so, in some ways, in those areas where there's specialization, people know my work. But the bigger picture, the bigger context is without getting into it, because if we got into it, we would talk about it forever. Because this is a traumatic issue for me, right? It's a personal problem for me, which is starting around the late 90s when I was in graduate school. Um, I became sort of a pariah. Uh, and I was made into a target by the people around me. I was made into a pariah. So, we can debate whether or not that's my own fault. If I was like, selected, if I was selected for a good reason or for, my own faults and I deserved it kind of thing, right? You get into this sort of victimizer dichotomy, but a public secret grew around me. So, it's close to saying a conspiracy. A public secret is when a person's targeted and the people around him agree to, be focused on that person, but to not admit it openly. So they can talk about it amongst themselves, but not to you. So you're always the odd man out. So it's like living behind a two-way mirror, basically. So that doesn't mean that the people on the other side of the mirror are against you. It could be that they're against you, but in some ways, you're always sort of like the odd person. And so the public secret grew around me, and it's been growing ever since. I told two friends and they told two friends. And so that's kind of the context for me, which is a difficult context because I don't experience life in a typical manner. I experience all kinds of people see it as almost as if you're a representation, in a social constructionist sense. And it's not an accident that all of this originated in a cultural studies context where people are thinking about these kinds of issues, right? Discourse, representation, what does it mean to be human in a post-humanist, context. And so if you're representation, that means that there's nothing authentic, there's nothing essential about this person. And so you can socially construct that person. So let's change the dynamics around this guy. Let's see what we can make him do. Let's see what sticks. Let's see what doesn't stick, which is basically what, a public figure has to contend with in some ways, except that they would enjoy, the privilege of knowing what people are saying about him, and they would hear it and they could respond in real time and so on and so forth. So in the case of a public secret, you don't get to participate. You're more or less on the receiving end of things. So it's been a long process, and it's a frog in boiling water kind of situation because it starts off in an innocuous way, and then it gets to the point where you can no longer hold down a job because there's just so much BS around you that it's just become unworkable. So that's basically the reason I'm an independent scholar. It's not by choice. I was pushed into this situation. And it's difficult because it doesn't allow you to put your best foot forward. You're kind of already a kind of to use Agamben's term, in a state of exception. You're placed in a state of exception. It's almost like a human sacrifice or a political prisoner or something along these lines. And so it doesn't bring out the best in people because they see you already, in this compromised situation. So even if they want to do something, if they can't speak about it openly because other people won't let them. And I'm always amazed, that nobody says anything. I've tried to give interviews on this subject. I've tried to involve other people. I stayed quiet about it most of the first 10 years because I was hoping it would just go away. Eventually things would normalize, and it didn't. And so at a certain point, I would have to talk about it a little bit to people I know, see what kind of response they get. Usually they'll say something like, maybe you want to see a doctor, something along those lines, right? So it's like I can get a sense of, what I can expect from someone in the way they interact with what I have to say. If I tell them a lot of heavy information and I never hear from them again, I kind of know, well, they don't want their lives dragged into this spectacle, but dragged into the vortex of this scenario. It's really, I consider it a human rights issue. I've talked to lawyers, but they didn't respond. I've sent emails that didn't respond. So it's kind of like you're on your own, and we'll see what happens, So I'm not along for the ride at all. I don't consent to it. The sooner it ends, the better. I don't care if it's in the news or I don't care if it's in academic spaces to be discussed. But usually what happens is that people say, oh, well, let's use this to discuss other issues. And then those issues don't get resolved and they get passed on to a different set of issues. Those can't be resolved. It's like everything else in our public culture. You never sort of come to a conclusion on something because somebody else has a different opinion. So it's sort of like bread and circuses at a certain point. And I've dealt with a lot of violence. I've dealt with a lot of sexual harassment. I mean, I've been on lockdown since before COVID, I've been on lockdown since around 2017. I don't go outside very much. I can't go for walks, too much harassment. And so I go jogging once in a while, and I go when it's not very busy outside, so that there's fewer issues. So anyways, sorry to add this to the discussion, but that's my life.
No, I'm glad you did share that with our audience. I really appreciate that. I was going to ask you, was it really hard for you initially to want to do things like YouTube? Because that's precarious, like you don't even have the comfort to want to run, whenever you want to. So is this like a big challenge too, like even being seen, being on a public forum like this?
Not at all. This is a pleasure. It's a delight. This is what I live for, and this is what I want to do. So I'm grateful.
Awesome. Um, Going back to what you were saying too, how does this play into the Too Black to Fail title itself? Um, Based on our interaction before this interview, you seem to suggest that there were issues with the title for you to get this book published, and just the reception of the book when it came to a title Too Black to Fail. Did you have what were some of the issues that you dealt with just with the title like that, Too Black to Fail?
Yeah. Do you want to jump into the slides? Because
Mm-hmm.
I've got a picture of the book, so we can
Definitely.
show it to your viewers. Do I share screen
Yeah,
now?
you should be able to share screen.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, great. All right. Whoops. Oh, here we go. Okay, so this is this is Too Black to Fail. Um, yeah, I had some difficulties getting this book published. And again, it's putting your best foot forward, it's not maybe a great idea for me to talk about this, but I sent the book to 25 publishers before it was finally accepted. And so you know how it goes. You send it to one place, and publishers don't like multiple submissions. So they want you to send the manuscript to them, allow them to consider it. They get back to you, quickly or not quickly. And sometimes it can take a few months. If they're interested, they can get peer reviewers to peer review it. And if that fails, then you're looking at, 6 months or what have you. So before it got accepted by Red Quill Books, it was accepted by Rowman and Littlefield, not for publication, but for review.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, it was sent late 2019, just before COVID started. So it sort of got caught up in the publisher closing their offices for a few months after the initial lockdowns. And then when they got around to it, they said, sorry, we didn't get reviews done. So we're going to start that again. So overall, it took 14 months before, finally I got the answer that the reviews were negative. And this was for a series, not and the editors of that series were interested in the book, but I found out through the grapevine that the editors at the publisher were not happy about the book, and that is likely for identity politics reasons why the book was not accepted ultimately. And then it went to another publisher, and they, I say sat on it. They worked on it for 6 months before turning it down. And then luckily after that, George Ragakos at Red Quill Books, which is a small publisher based at Concordia University in Ottawa, they liked it, they read it, and so they published it almost within a few months. So I'm very grateful to them that the book is published. So I don't know, and also endorsements. I have a nice endorsement from Andrew Hartman, who's at University of Chicago, who worked on Culture Wars. But I had difficulty getting endorsements for this book as well. People seemed interested, and then I'd never hear from them again, So, and
And
I
so
don't.
do you think that that was because of personal political reasons? Like, because you said that because of culture war, or identity politics, which is interesting because you argue in the book like why that's such a problematic idea in the first place. And so
Yeah.
you're saying that that was used against you even in this situation.
Yeah, I mean, identity politics have been around since the 60s, let's say, in various forms. But in the last few years, identity politics have, what's referred to as wokeism, let's say the woke phase of identity politics, which is very different from what was happening in the 1980s when the culture wars, so to speak, erupted on campuses. So this is kind of like a very different phase of the woke issue. And also it's at the time when Trump has become president, right? So
Mm-hmm.
from 2016, I started writing this in 2018. So Trump is president at this point. And so, do people want criticism of Obama in this context? There's a controversy just in suggesting the subject.
Mm-hmm.
But in relation to the publishers' responses, when I sent the book out to many publishers, and this is where my paranoia and the public secret thing starts to kick in. Normally, you'd hear from someone one day and someone another day or someone a different day. But let's say I had sent it out to 5 different people, I would get a decline from 3 different people on the same day. And then
Wow.
again, and then again, a few weeks later, a few months later, 3 publishers at the same time.
Mm.
So, and I just want to say, because I know how it sounds, when you start talking conspiracy, the person saying these things, the person talking about it is the one that sounds crazy. So you're
Mm-hmm.
thinking, is this person trying to get attention for himself? And no, I'm not trying to get attention. I really, don't want to be in this mess. I really, want to live whatever not a normal life, but a life where my habeas corpus rights and so on are recognized. Um, and so, I've published a lot of books before this one came out. I've published a lot of articles. I don't need extra attention. I'm not looking for a special route, to have my work considered. I'm not worried about that. Um, so yeah, so, very happy that this book is finally available. It came out, I wrote it in 2018, 2019, but it came out in 2022 after the Bernie book, as it happens. But the goal was to write a book that would be able to have some sort of resonance in the Bernie Sanders campaign, because even though I'm a complete socialist, and Bernie Sanders is part of the Democratic Party, you know, uh, situation, I nevertheless supported Sanders's candidacy. I wanted to see Bernie Sanders get elected, and so I wanted to contribute to that in some way by bringing up some of the issues that I anticipated would be at work in the campaign, and I wasn't wrong about that. There were 20 candidates for the Sanders election, and identity politics did come into play, especially at a very crucial moment. Now, technically, Bernie was winning the candidacy, and he had won the first 3 primaries. And this was heading towards South Carolina, which has a black vote issue at play, and with a tendency for choosing a conservative Democrat candidate. And it was more likely to go to Biden. And so at that moment, the you know, leadership figures in the party asked many other candidates to drop out of the race. Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, Beto O'Rourke, and Elizabeth Warren stayed in the race.
Mm-hmm.
Had Elizabeth Warren got out of the race, her voters would have likely gone to Bernie Sanders. And so there was a sort of orchestrated coup within the party against Sanders to make sure he didn't win. And so
Mm-hmm.
a lot of these identity issues were in play at that moment, especially between Sanders and Warren. So that's the sort of thing I was trying to alert people to. So, oh, can we just go with the slides, or did you want to
Yes,
say?
no, keep going. Because like I said, if I say something, it's just gonna keep going off in a tangent because the Bernie Bros book, I definitely want to keep it kind of to the side for right now since we're focused on this book. But so, what is the deal with Obama being upside down? Obviously, there's a symbolism there, right?
Yeah, so the cover of the book, I mean, it's lucky it wasn't published by Roman because they have a generic series and the image wouldn't have been on the cover. But the image for the cover is made by a Philadelphia-based artist. His name is Theodore Harris. And I'll just jump here. This is on the right, another work in the same series. So he did a number of these mousetrap pieces. And so I asked him if he would mind doing a Obama portraits mousetrap for the cover of the book. And so that's what we have here. And the mice have nibbled away at the portraits there.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's a work by Harris, a collage artist. This is a piece about Paul Robeson Paul Robeson on the left. And I met him in Montreal a few years ago, and I was very interested in his work. He had some collages up in the gallery space and accompanied by poems by Amiri Baraka, no less. And so we interacted. I've interviewed him for a publication, and so that's how the cover was made. And just to give you a sense of one of the issues that I'm dealing with as a thinker, as a Marxist thinker, and this has always been an issue. We live in a context where we're more or less dealing with postmodern theory in academia. So if you're going to write a book about the Obama portraits, you're going to have to, in some ways, deal with, what the academic field is thinking about and likely to use to respond to your work. It's not quite the same discussion that you'll have in a public setting, for example. However, if you think of the artists who made the paintings of the Obamas for the National Portrait Gallery, they're, very well versed in this language. So that's kind of the thing. One of the things that's odd about this moment when we're talking about wokeism is that so much of what motivates woke issues is postmodern theory. That's academic theory that has to do with quote unquote campus wars. But that often when the public is thinking about it, they're thinking about it in more standard, let's say, universalist terms or civil rights terms. They're not thinking about it in terms of postmodern theory. So that's kind of like one of the disjunctures that my work is always thinking about, because I'm coming to this from a Marxist point of view, which is a universalist point of view. It's not a postmodern. And so I think about what are the chances for something like a Sanders democratic socialism among not only the public, but among, let's say, the middle class, the liberal elite or the educated sector, what I refer to as the petty bourgeoisie or the professional managerial class. One term that we've heard a lot about recently is the PMC, the professional managerial class, which is, you could call that the 20%, if you want to call it that, the service sector or the bureaucracy. But I tend to think about it more in traditional Marxist terms as the petty bourgeoisie rather than the PMC. But it's largely the same idea. So in 22, the association that I'm part of, Universities Art Association of Canada, which is also French, Association des Arts Universitaires Canada, their annual conference themes indicate more or less what the presentations are about. So I did a study based on the descriptions of the different presentations at the annual conference of the UAAC. It's the equivalent of the CAA, the College Art Association in the US, which is similar to the MLA, the Modern Languages Association. That's in literature. CAA is more like visual arts and cinema and that sort of thing. So UAC is the Visual Arts Association of Canada. And so you get a general sense here what the themes are that are of concern to scholars today. So you see here overwhelmingly race issues, nationality, diaspora, gender, LGBTQ, and other identity. You're looking at, about 70% oriented towards identity politics. That's largely due to the influence of postmodern theory. So if you add to that body politics, this could be like performativity theory or something like that. You've got good 3/4 of the concerns around identity. Community is sort of the safe term for politics. If you're doing community issues, you're not, you're not talking about, liberalism, socialism, capitalism. You're talking about community. So it's like localism. In a way, it's more politically flexible, a term. And so ecology is another concern, and then class at around 4%. And the other two small fractions are activism and neoliberalism globalization. So it gives you kind of a sort of sense of why a book on the Obama portraits that's coming to the subject from a critical Marxist point of view might have some difficulty, especially at this moment where there's a lot of writing on race issues across the board, left, right, and center, a lot of writing on race issues. So these are the identity-related topics that are of interest. These are not percentages, they're just number points. But you have anti-colonialism, anti-racism, decoloniality, indigenous issues, post-colonialism. Post-colonialism being less of a trendy term. It was the term people used in the 90s. Now there's a shift towards decoloniality, which is it's a more intersectional approach to some of these issues. I was surprised intersectionality was fairly low. And then relationality, the last, is a term that tends to work in conjunction with intersectionality. And then ideology topics, not popular, right? So liberalism, very low. Communism, 0. Marxism, very low. Some mention of class, nothing on anti-war that year, nothing on anarchism. And then community, again, very high. So community tends to dovetail fairly easily with identity topics. And then I call this matterism topics. You could use a different term, but it's basically methods that are interested in materialism, but that are not interested in materialism in the sense of historical Marxist materialism. Although it could be that it's informed at some point in its development by Marxist materialism, but it's moving away from political economy, it's moving away from class struggle, and it's sort of, in a way, it's coming back to, what used to be known as bourgeois materialism before Marxism made a critique of bourgeois materialism. So it's practically an idealist, quote unquote, or objectivist approach to matter. And this is a question that interests me very much in relation to the phrase Black Lives Matter and related approaches to the politics of difference. So postmodernism, performativity, phenomenology, ecology, new materialisms, multi-senses, the work on the senses is very popular in the discipline. Trauma studies is very popular. Animal studies is very popular. I was surprised there was not much on networks this year, though a few years ago, there was a lot more research on networks. It kind of faded out as a trendy topic for whatever reason. But given the fact that we still live in a world of social media, of tech giants, networks is still an issue, and it informs much of what we do. So the portraits were exhibited at the National Portrait Gallery, and then they went on tour across the country. They went to Chicago, Brooklyn, LA, Atlanta, Houston, San Francisco, and Boston. So a lot of people have had the chance to go see these portraits. There's an endorsement here from Lori Lightfoot, the mayor of Chicago. And there was a publication put out by the National Portrait Gallery and Princeton University, but it's basically a coffee table book. And so it's, a lot of formalities. There's no real, there's no criticism, obviously, of Obama or analysis of the books. So it's more of a coffee table souvenir. And these are the works themselves. There's tons to say. The painting of Obama is made by Kehinde Wiley. And the portrait of Michelle Obama is made by Amy Sherald. They're the first Black artists to be featured in the National Portrait Gallery collection for paintings of the president. Before that, the Clintons had hired Simi Lee Knox, a Black artist, for their portraits from 2001 and 2004. Those are not in the National Portrait Gallery, they're in the White House collection. So at the end of a term, or at the end of 2 terms, a president will typically have a portrait of them made, a painting, in other words, not a photograph, but a painting, and a painting of their partner. Historically, it's always been the First Lady. And then a second set of paintings, one set is made for the National Portrait Gallery, and a second set is made for the White House. So this is the first set. And what the Obamas did, they were very interested in the collecting that the White House did in terms of art. They took an interest in the art, and they basically hired what I would refer to as portrait artists, as opposed to portrait painters. There are people who make paintings that are, strictly speaking, a likeness of the sitter, almost photographic. What the Obamas did is they selected 2 artists who were working more in the museum field, in the fine art sector. So this was a break with the trend, definite break. So we have with the Obama painting, there's flowers that give an indication of where he's from. The lilies are from Kenya, which refers to his father's background, jasmine from Hawaii, and chrysanthemums from Chicago. He's wearing a casual Friday suit with no tie. So that kind of makes him more of an approachable person. He's seated on a wooden chair. So I'll show you some other paintings. There's reasons for that. One of them could be that very often Black royalty, in terms of traditional African sculpture, is shown seated on a chair. And so there's a kind of allusion to Black royalty here that is possible. The other one's a reference to Abraham Lincoln. His arms are crossed. So that's kind of interesting for me in terms of Kehinde Wiley's interests in Obama and making this painting. I argue that he's hiding his sex. He's blocking his sex. So in some ways, he's preventing the gaze of Kehinde Wiley. So it acknowledges Kehinde Wiley's investment in homoeroticism in his work. And in some ways, it shows Obama, responding to that in some way. This is my interpretation. Somebody could think of it differently. His legs are slightly curved inward, which shows a sense of athleticism. And his watch is half shown. So I'm not really sure what that is, but portraits are often thought of as memento mori in this long tradition. So are flowers thought of as memento mori. So they're reminders of life's transience. And so I think perhaps that has something to do with why the watch is showing. The Amy Sherald painting, I'll just mention this here because I don't think we're going to come back to these paintings. She's seated almost in a kind of triangular pyramidal shape. And so her dress touches both ends of the bottom. So that creates this very strong sense of stability in the work. And she's wearing a pattern that when I first saw it, I thought, well, this kind of looks like Mondrian. It kind of looks like modernist abstraction, but it turns out it's inspired by Gee's Bend quilts. So these are African-American quilts made in the US. And the dress is made by a designer called Michelle Smith, known as Millie. So this is a Millie dress that Michelle Obama is known to have supported. The designs are relatively affordable, and they're marketed in terms of the desire for equality in human rights, racial equality, LGBT equality. And it's also made of a specific fabric, which is poplin. It's sort of a rough material that's associated with workers' clothes. So we have both Obamas presenting themselves in some way as ordinary people. Barack Obama with his Friday casual suit, and Michelle Obama, and his poise as an athlete is kind of echoes his earlier years in college. Michelle Obama is supporting American designers and comes across as, even though she's in a kind of fashion pose with her hand under her chin, and she's emphasizing fashion and her choice of dress, it's nevertheless an approachable, you could almost say it's identifying fashion with causes, with social justice issues and causes, which is something that I question thoroughly in terms of this work in this book.
I had a comment going back to the Obama portrait is so because we had an episode about 3 weeks ago. I went on to a podcast, Tracy Carson, who she's an independent YouTuber like myself, and we discussed this enigma behind Obama. And it's not just confined to yourself and just the difficulty of you publishing a book about Obama and the Obama portraits, because there's a pressure whenever Obama's brought up to say the right thing about Obama. Even when you're criticizing him, there's always a pause, it seems, when it comes to critiquing Barack Obama, even more so than other politicians, because and there's a social pressure, especially depending on where you are. It's more localized. You're around certain types of people. You definitely got to be careful about what you say. Don't even dare say this around a group of Black people just randomly. You never know what kind of response you're going to get when it comes to Obama. But the picture is very much indicative of kind of this mystique, I think, that's been created. I don't know who created it. I don't know if that was already going to be baked into it by him being the first Black president, him being from Hawaii, his upbringing. His dad wasn't really in his life at all. And then he had connections with Kansas because of his mom, but Hawaii, Indonesia, Kenya, just all these different geographic spaces, even not just from a geographical standpoint. The whole idea of the birth certificate that was used against Obama when he got into office. It's a really he became this caricature that was hard to kind of define. And even if you assess his political career, you mentioned the drone campaign and just like what was he really known for in his presidency. And that's kind of overlooked, even though, like the fact that he droned all these different people, and he's very much in the background now. and he has a relative comfort, like a lot of presidents do that aren't in office anymore. They have a relative comfort of just kind of being in the background. Even George W. Bush. I mean, as unpopular as he was at one point, it's almost like you forget that he was even the president. With the 9/11 and all the controversy behind that, and Obama is pretty much following that same tradition of U.S. politics where they fall in the sunset. And it's kind of like, okay, I'm doing another life. I have my other life going on. You know, I've done my job, whatever that job was. But it's just interesting how that photograph is there, or the painting, just like the feet are kind of half covered. It's not really a full picture of him. And Michelle's pretty much out in the open when you compare that to her.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, those are all good questions and good points. Every president, in a way, becomes royalty, in a sense, right? Um, and in the case of Obama, Black royalty. So those are two issues. And Obama was marketed as a cool candidate,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So he was very different from George W. Bush, right? He was almost like the opposite. And even though I get into the marketing of George W. Bush as well, there was a whole campaign to how to use W, the pronunciation, and to, in a way, kind of reclaim this, to fight the stereotype of the ignorant Southerner, this kind of like hokey accent that everyone uses. And so he kind of reclaimed it for this kind of down home common sense idea, but also the W as a kind of brand, almost like if you were an owner of horses or whatever. Um, Obama came in as a celebrity, almost as a cool candidate from the start. And so that's one of the things I'm going to unpack here is this, what you might refer to a cultural repertoire or a cultural environment in which a lot of these, I don't want to call them signifiers, but I'll use the term, these signifiers that are in the media that can condense in different ways and that might be used for marketing purposes for a political candidate. And all of the things that you mentioned at the beginning are many of the things that made Obama the perfect candidate. In some ways, it had to be Obama because instead of Hillary Clinton, precisely because of all of the things that you mentioned, and the first Black president, the history of race in the United States, slavery, Jim Crow segregation, and then the United States facing these problems in terms of the wars in the Middle East, in terms of the economic crisis. And so Obama comes in and he's going to change all that. Yes, we can. We can set on a new course. We can do something that's completely different from what came before. And as it turned out, Obama was simply another what I refer to as a new Democrat.
Hmm.
The style of Democrat that you could compare to Tony Blair in the UK. Basically, a Democrat that's neoliberal and whose policies are shaped by conservative policies. So everything that comes out of Reagan and Thatcher gets appropriated by the Democrats in their effort to jockey for power. So the next thing you know, they're doing things that don't sound democratic at all. And there's a whole kind of global economic rationale for why that's essential, why that's necessary, which continues, of course, today with Biden, who's a completely different character. But
Hmm.
Biden came after Trump. Um, the reason why these portraits were significant in 2018 when they came out is that this played into the response to the Trump presidency, which was seen by many people as a white supremacist, revanchist candidate, somebody who would, say, who is this Black person in the White House? Let's get back to, let's make America great again. So there was this whole kind of like race element and nationalism, white supremacy that this came into challenge. So wanting to fight against that allowed you to, in some ways, forget about most of what Obama did while in office. And it doesn't change the fact that Obama is a very charismatic, affable person. He has an easy smile. He's well spoken. Ta-Nehisi Coates said, he was a Brooks Brother image of America. He was middle class and he avoided scandal on a personal level. You can consider it international scandal, but nevertheless. So, you can have a representation of Obama that in some ways manages to eclipse everything that we know about his administration. And that's exactly what prompted me to work on this. I was reading reviews in a website called Hyperallergic, which is very woke, very oriented towards identity issues. And it was all this gushing testimony, and people were so happy about it. It was around the same time that the movie Black Panther came out, the first Black superhero film. And so it had the same kind of, whatever you want to call it, amnesia. But I think that, you can get into it, and there are elements that work, that somehow make a lot of sense independently of the real politic. And those elements work within culture. So there's kind of like, it's almost as if you have like two pieces moving in different ways at the same time. You have cultural elements that are working within the culture that are effective, and Kehinde Wiley was a perfect commission for these elements. And so in a way, like the painting, if artwork is good, it outlives its context of production, right? So 100 years later, 200 years later, it's still good work. So it could be a portrait of, I don't know, it could be a portrait of Napoleon. He did a bunch of horrible things, but we understand the importance of David's painting of Napoleon as, an important work of propaganda art or something like this, right? It's so you can quote it indefinitely. So at the unveiling of the paintings, Kehinde Wiley said, this is our humanity, our ability to say, I matter, I was here. The ability to be the first American painter himself and Amy Sherald to paint the first American president and of the United States is overwhelming. I'm charting a path on earth through those plants. And he says there's a fight going on between Obama in the foreground and the plants that are trying to announce themselves underneath his feet, which is part of my rationale for why Obama's arms are crossed. Who gets to be the star of the show? Who gets to be the man who inhabits that story? So already Kehinde Wiley's doing here what he's always doing, which is in a way asserting his prepotency, is the term that I used, vis-a-vis Obama. And it's a credit to Obama's liberalism that he's, completely okay with this, right? So he's willing to work with Kehinde Wiley to make that happen. Just in terms of the marketing, this photo of a young girl, Parker Curry, a 2-year-old girl. Somebody was there at the right moment, captured this picture. She thought it was a picture of a queen, and she thought the National Portrait Gallery was her castle. So this went viral, and then Michelle Obama met with Parker Curry afterwards for a photo op. So there's a lot of discussion about the idea of seeing someone like yourself in a position of power or in a position of authority or respected position. And I think it's almost, I think in some ways it's leaving the culture, but for a while there, you would hear this a lot, looks like me, someone who looks like me, stated by African Americans. So, and the artists very much use this kind of language. And Michelle Obama said that that's what was important for her being the first lady, is that, African Americans, Black people would see themselves in her. And so this raises the whole question of disparity discourse and its operations in American culture. How is it that seeing somebody who's in the 1%, how does that appeal to the majority of poor people? Why is it that we would be so happy that somebody in the 1% who's Black has become president? On the one hand, there's the importance of that in relation to the civil rights legacy, but on the other side of it, it's kind of a dubious, one-to-one, so that if all you, as I would put it, if all you expect of your representatives is that they look like you, then you're not asking very much. You're not making very many demands.
Well, unfortunately, that has been a very successful tactic. And I think it goes a lot into the discussion we had 3 weeks ago about the Congressional Black Caucus. And I make the point that when the Congressional Black Caucus first became a thing, it was officially formed in 71, but 69 was like the first rendition of it. And in 1969, it wasn't even called the Congressional Black Caucus, it was called the Democratic Select Committee. And the agenda was very different back then because of, compared to now, the trajectory has been very much only, for me, the purpose is just simply, it's outlived its purpose. Because at first it was attached to the civil rights movement, as you just mentioned, the civil rights movement. And I think a lot of people, that's the thing. When are these pictures and these images and these talks of representation, when are these things going to be just like something of yesteryear? Because we're still talking about the civil rights movement still in 2024, really, is what I think it is. It's like the remnants of the civil rights era still. The Civil Rights Act created the Congressional Black Caucus itself in '65. So there's a history there, and there's still generations alive from that era. And so I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. And the Democratic Party has capitalized off of this. And even the Republican Party has capitalized off this identitarian angle with Nikki Haley being Indian, Vivek Ramaswamy being Indian American. Back in the day, they had Bobby Jindal. They tried that with him. It didn't really work out the way they wanted it to. But now they've been able to use it easier, even on that side, because we make the argument here that it's really a one-party system. It isn't a two-party system. It's really just one big-ass system, with the revolving door of the blue-red team, disguising it as being something different. And this is really the way they use it as a difference. To the degree they use identity politics, to me, would be, I guess, the difference. The way that they execute the culture war against each other. Because as far as the policies, I mean, they're pretty much the same party. Big wars, big pharmaceutical companies, whatever you want to call it, big banking industry. I mean, it's all capitalism at the end of the day. I mean, there's no distinction between the two, if you ask me. But the use of the visual is really powerful still. I mean, even the Kamala Harris, someone that's unpopular as Kamala Harris, I think she's like 36% popularity, right under Jim Crow Joe at 39%. And it was enough for her to say that she's a Black woman, even though that's very debatable. Her being East Indian and Black. I think her dad was like, or is like half Black, being from Jamaica, even not. But it was used effectively enough for her. She went to HBCU. That was a signifier. She knows the Black people because she went to Howard University. So she must be Black enough for Black America if she went to HBCU. So it's definitely a thing, and I don't know when it's going to die down. Unfortunately, people who don't really focus on the issues, they don't care. They don't even know what Marxism is. They don't know what socialism is. They don't know what it is correctly anyway. They know it's been characterized as something from the party that they support, but they don't have any connect with the class politics that you really try to unpack, because they're still stuck in the identity stuff. But at least they look like I do. If they're all corrupt, but at least they're Black corrupted people. And I hear that from a lot of people, that kind of mentality.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much you could say. The question for me, from a Marxist point of view, is the same question you're asking, but strictly speaking, on the left. Like, how does identity, the left is usually pretty clear that it's based in socialist politics, which are derived from some kind of 19th century socialism. There's debates with anarchists And then you have the whole kind of first, second, third, fourth international Maoism, Castroism. You have, that history. And then, the question then becomes, how does identity relate to that question? On the one hand, there's women's issues, there's race issues, there are nationality, religion kind of questions. And the Marxist movement or the communist movement, whatever you want to call it, socialism, has dealt with those in different ways. Sometimes adequately, sometimes better than anyone else at that time period, and sometimes inadequately. So, the left has its own kind of internal discussion on these issues. And so what we're discussing really now is postmodernism, in the sense that history has come to an end. The class struggle is no longer the engine of development as it was understood by, let's say, Marxists. And so we're not really concerned with, moving beyond capitalism. We've accepted that capitalism is the least worst system. It's not the best system, but it's the least worst system. And within that, what can be done to make changes? And so that's, in a way, what makes identity issues such a strong issue of distinction within the intramural debate between tag team Republican and Democrat, right? So if you want to get out of that, I mean, you always have this kind of like, there's only two dimensions that are addressed in American politics: the liberal and the conservative. The socialist is never on the table. It's never part of the discussion, even when it is. Even when somebody's talking about the left in the US, it's not really the revolutionary left. It's some kind of new left, some sort of new social movement perspective. It might be a kind of Occupy Wall Street. It might be a Black Lives Matter like version of Occupy Wall Street, focused more on police issues, the criminal justice system, these kinds of questions. And so they might become, if it's the women's march, then it might go in a direction of gender issues, might have to deal with abortion or what have you. And so the left becomes this kind of kaleidoscope of issues. Mark Lila, who's a liberal thinker, distinguished the Democrats from the Republicans in that regard by saying, if you go to their website, I don't know if it's still the case, but you go to the Republican website, there's one vision. There's a one size fits all for making America great again. You go to the Democratic website, it says people, and then when you go to people, it directs you to different issues. So that's kind of the way that what Nancy Fraser refers to as progressive neoliberalism. So you have a neoliberal model of austerity, of foreign interventionism, of basically the politics of the billionaire class, the donor class, and the lobbyists. And then you have with that things like, or you have, in addition to Wall Street and the Pentagon, you have a panoply of justice issues, of social justice issues. And in a way, Amanda Gorman I'm showing here, was somebody who kind of embodied that. And that's kind of interesting from an art perspective, because in the past, you would have had a poet laureate, someone like, let's say, Toni Morrison, who is an established figure with a known accomplishment in her field. But in this case, we had an unknown, somebody who's not particularly recognized for her writing, but she did write lines for a doll, a black doll. That was one of her first contracts. And so, she became kind of like this Parker Curry for Michelle Obama, and she called her grandma. She called Hillary Clinton grandma. So all of this chummy language, which is part of the tradition of candidates marketing themselves to the public. You want to use a kind of family photograph, family album sort of understanding of what's going on. And with Obama, that could extend to the race issue within the American family. So a lot of things get kind of tailored to this sort of easy identification, which of course is a myth, right? It creates a myth. It masks all of the historical questions that are at play. So then, I mean, the question, I think that my response to your question would be, well, what is a perfect solution? What's a perfect match between class and identity from a left perspective. Like, how does it work? And when is it that, the left is going to be, when are people on the left going to be able to, move forward with a program and a project that is satisfactory across the board? Can it do that, right? Is that possible? Some people would argue against that as a possibility. So they would want to go in an intersectional direction instead.
Well, I think it's very interesting because you did, in the part of your commentary that stood out was the part where you talked about the possibility of an alt left in the Obama book. I thought that was a really interesting insertion in the book because you discussed a lot about, and both books honestly have a lot in common in the sense that it only confirmed kind of like my views all along that I don't know if we agree with this or not, but I don't see a difference between necessarily, I see a difference in thought process, but overall, I don't see a difference between the parties. And I don't see necessarily that much of a difference between the Trump persona, because at the end of the day, it's still a character, it's a caricature. Every president needs support. They have to create a code of personality, a caricature. Obama definitely had this aspect about him, this type of mystique around him. Trump has a different version of it, but nevertheless, it's still a code of personality, whether it's more acceptable, less acceptable, more accessible, less accessible. It's still a code of personality. And they all share this in common, these leaders do. I don't see a difference between these groups of people when we lump the left and the right. I don't know what that means anymore. Because I am operating as someone, I do identify as someone that is like an independent leftist, which means now outside of the two parties completely. But I think I definitely have a distinction from like the neoliberal stuff. I just don't, it's so suffocating that I don't even think we can have that conversation that you just mentioned about how do we use the class analysis and but also consider the racial. I don't even know if we could do that in the context that we're working with now because it's so overwhelmingly identity driven. There's no class discussion whatsoever, which is so frustrating because my friends who you think would be totally in sync with me, it seems like all they care about is identity politics. They say that they're against the wars, but they're totally cool when the people that they support are against or funding the wars. And I'm like, how's that any different? And it's like, do you not see how that also affects the economics? I mean, how's that helping the Black people that you apparently support over here? Like, how does that help anybody? So you're bombing brown people in other countries, and that's somehow helping who? I mean, it's such a contradiction. Like, you can't even have the discussion because it's almost like we're put in a category when we say that we focus on economics and we focus on the working class, but the people here are like, well, what about the Black people? The Black people are part of the working class. What are you talking about? It's like, isn't that understood? But it's not even understood because they divide that and put that in a whole category in itself. And it's just like you can't agree with anybody that's outside of that paradigm. The fact that Trumpers agree with me on some things, oh my God, you can't, that means you must be one of them, or you must be just, you can't be one of us, you got to be one of them, you got to be something completely different. I just think that's a part of the problem with categories, honestly. I don't think that we have a right now in the context that we're dealing with to say what is left and what is right. I just don't think that the left in the United States is so weak based on the traditional definition of what I think left should mean. If we're talking about Marxism and stuff, I mean, that's almost like that's a very, very small percentage of people. And if you're talking about the voting bloc is a really small percentage in the United States, because we've been so sucked into the identity world. And even people who are like anarchists is like they will support Democrats. like at the last second. And I'm like, and it's just something I just can't really put my fingers on it. I understand that everything goes against the third parties and everyone else, but it's like for you to just keep supporting these people like this, knowing that they're pretty much the same people, is pretty perturbing, honestly. And I don't know. The left hasn't done a good enough job. Whatever the left is, that's the thing about it. I'm trying to figure out what is the left. That would be my question. What is the left? Is the left Bernie Sanders? Is that honestly where we are? Social Democrat light? Is that where we are as far as the left in the United States? If that's where we are, we're in some serious trouble, I think, because even people using the socialism tag on him was effective. And you alluded to it yourself in the book. I defeated the socialists. And I mean, the same stuff that Trump was saying, the Democrats were saying against Bernie, we defeated the socialists. It's really scary. But like I said, I think that's the issue. I don't know what category people are even in anymore because they've moved over to window so far to the right. It's like everything seems conservative to me now. I don't know. Maybe you can help me with this, but it's a scary world that we live in. That you can simply say a word or two, and people are like, "Oh my gosh, let me take a step back from him or her," because they're a socialist or whatever. It's just I've never seen anything like it in my life, but I don't know.
Okay. Well, let's okay, yeah, okay. I just um yeah, I mean, so many possibilities in terms of a response where the problem isn't simply obviously an American problem, you know, the condition of the left in the US. It does seem that, I mean, we might even ask the same question, is Trump a fascist? Like, can you even refer to the GOP as a fascist party? Like, they're not like the traditional fascists of the early 20th century. It's something else. It's some sort of postmodern globalist version of that. So in a way, we can kind of have skepticism, let's say, from a postmodern perspective of any of these concepts, right? And do they have any kind of constituency? What sort of constituency? And it's because in some ways, I mean, part of what I'm looking at is this shift from, you know, what you believe, what your commitments are in terms of politics, being replaced by questions of ontology, questions of being, embodiment. You know, postmodernists are always talking about bodies, like there's bodies of different whatever shapes in the room, you know, as if we're bodies, we're not people with ideas and commitments and so on. And the reason why that has this kind of like purchase in the conversation is because in some ways there's this kind of like sense of hopelessness, right? This like if we've accepted that capitalism is the least worst system, we don't want to go back to, obviously nobody, not even leftists, want a Stalinist system, but you still find Stalinism here and there in communist parties in various countries. It still exists, though it may not claim Stalin as a figure. Though I did listen to a lecture recently where someone said Uncle Joseph, which was Uncle Joe, yeah, which was kind of weird. It was the Communist Party of Great Britain. Yeah, I mean, I'm a Marxist thinker, so it's like for me, it's not so much of a quandary, you know, like the connection between words and meaning and histories. You know, it's like the perspective. It's not. I can't say that there is a strong socialist movement anywhere that I could point to, but there are a million communists in the Communist Party in China. You know, that's a lot of people. There's communism in Vietnam. There's communism in some countries. North Korea is not a good model. And, you know, every leftist has a criticism to make of every communist regime that exists, which isn't a great endorsement for the left. And it explains why a lot of people are simply disenchanted and not really interested in going further than what we have. But I think, you know, if you believe in progress, or if you believe that change is necessary, well, then that change is going to have to come from somewhere. It's going to have to come from some direction or other. Do you want things going more in this authoritarian neo-McCarthyite direction that we have with, World War III being promised to us in terms of a war against Russia and China being inevitable? If you're not for that, if you want something else, if you want people to have a decent living, then you're thinking like a leftist one way or another, whether you use the term, whether you use the words or not. So it's like Michael Moore's Capitalism, a Love Story. Socialism exists already in various ways, like the postal service, for example. Countries that have universal healthcare, well, those are socialist programs. So, these things are not, as long as the Marxist answer is, as long as you have capitalism, you're going to have socialism.
That's very interesting. The way I like to approach it is basically, I like to see most people as a free agent of change. And I think if we don't lump people as far as like their right, their left, I think that there's a greater possibility, because I think right now there's too much baggage around, or not necessarily baggage, there's too much confusion around the terminology that's used. And I think who uses the terminology has a lot to do with that. And it's intentionally used to be sabotaging, I think, especially when they're signaling this like from the establishment. They're definitely doing it for an agenda to basically discourage people to be leftists. They're discouraging people of, this isn't the right thing to do. You don't want to do this. And then they will use, like you said, China as an example. And it's very anti-global, honestly, the mentality is. And I think a lot of it has to do with this core periphery type, the G7 versus the rest of the world. That type of mentality is very prevalent within the US left. And I just think one more commentary about this before we continue with the Obama portraits. I just thought it was interesting what Cornel West said in the Bernie book when he says the neo-fascist in office versus the neoliberal, but yet he uses the same descriptive element afterwards about funding the military, everything else. They do the exact same thing, but he uses a different term for one versus the other. And that's why I'm like, and even just like reading your book or books, like in this case, I'm like, so what is the difference between neoliberalism and fascism? Like based on within this context that we're talking about in the United States, is there a difference between the two? Like, are we talking about the same thing here? Because it's obviously not the fascism of Italy under Mussolini. I mean, it's definitely not that. So what kind of fascism are we talking about? Is this a neo-fascism that's confined to the US and the neoliberalism is just facilitating the process?
Well, I think you're asking the same question you asked a while ago. Words and, Michel Foucault wrote a book, Les mots et les choses, translated in English, The Order of Things. And it's about, what's the connection between words and reality, and there are different ways of answering that question if you're doing cultural theory. If you're working with, let's say, a structuralist semiotic approach, well, in a semiotic approach, there's no necessary connection between a word and the thing that it's referring to, which allows the gap between the signifier and the signified. It allows for different meanings to be imparted to a word, right? So even though we're both using the same word, we mean different things. And when it comes to the race and class debate, there's so many books with like completely different understandings of the same historical events, let's say. So they're working with, like, let's say the 1619 project on the one hand, and the Trump's 1776 project. They're both talking about the American Revolution, but they're both saying completely different things. At a certain point, this is kind of like a standard issue in epistemology. You have absolute meaning on one side, and then you have relative meaning on the other side. So on the one hand, it means something. On the other hand, it means nothing. Somewhere the truth is somewhere in between those two things. However, the truth, if it is true, it will have an almost absolute meaning without becoming like rigid. And so you get in then the question of mediation. Like a sociologist will let's say something happens. A sociologist will have an answer for what happened. A psychologist will have a different answer. A philosopher will have a different answer. A historian will have a completely different method for answering that question. And then among the historians, there are leftist historians, there are racialist historians, there are feminist historians. And so welcome to academia. A lot of books, a lot of books to publish, a lot of disagreements to be had. And then meanwhile, history, the train wreck of history, lumbers on. So then there's a sense of urgency, right? There's a sense that, well, these meanings, these words are struggle, are a matter of struggle, right? So this is what Marx says in his preface to the introduction to the critique of political economy, is that by and large, ideas and maybe words and ideas are a reflection of the forces at play in a society, the interests at work, and the structure of the economy, what it can be and what it can't be. Like, is it a slave economy? Is it a capitalist economy? Is it a socialist economy? What it can be and what it can't be is largely fixed, or not fixed, but structured by the powers in place. Obviously, the billionaires don't want us to tax them more. So you have then, you don't only have ideas reflecting this reality, but you have a struggle over those ideas and over those terms. And a good argument, a good set of concepts can change how we understand those forces and those relations. So for example, what Marx achieved with Capital and other books is basically a very close study of liberal economic theory. He didn't invent most of his terms. He didn't invent most of his concepts. What he pointed out is that all of these things are all very nice, but how is it that you can't understand that, these people are being exploited? These people are in misery. How do you leave that out of your analysis? And so he developed many different terms and concepts that would understand economics in a different way, using the same terms and the same ideas. So, that's referred to as, the way he put it as men fight it out in the realm of ideas. And culture is part of this superstructural realm. Politics, religion, philosophy, these are all kind of superstructural ideas that people don't take seriously necessarily in a pragmatic sense. What do you need these ideas for? This isn't whatever. But obviously, when you're looking at art, where the artists are making $500,000 a painting, well, what's going on there? Why is there power in art? Why is there power in imagery? And how does, if you think about it in terms of an economy, it's a different matter. Like, for example, yes, a star athlete has a lot of power. They're a brand name, they get an endorsement for millions of dollars. They can have influence on business. They can have influence on politics, right? But it's also part of a political economy. In other words, that power works in certain ways. It doesn't work in other ways. It doesn't, for example, redistribute that wealth, right? It concentrates that wealth and it orients it towards more things of the same sort. So, I mean, this is what I'm doing is I'm fighting over ideas and I'm fighting it over images. And that's a little bit the difference between art history and what I did, which was visual studies. In visual studies, you move into a broader realm of culture, a broader, including popular culture, cinema, and so on, a Times Magazine cover, and so on. And so you're using a lot of the same ideas that you might use to study, Baroque painting in the 17th century, but you're doing it today where there's still power at work. There's political economy issues. There's class issues to address. And that's what happens in cultural theory. That's what cultural theorists do. And so, an effective deconstruction, as some will see, can have an impact on politics. That's the argument. And in the same way, Bernie Sanders' critique, if he was elected, he would go into office, he would pass some amendments, he would pass new laws, he would put new bills on the table, and things could change for people. So this is the kind of base superstructure argument that you get in Marxist theory and that you find in non-Marxist theory as well, but without those terms per se, where the political economy tends to disappear.
Thank you for those explanations, by the way, because I know my audience will appreciate it. Some of the most encouraging comments have been, you have a way of putting things into layman's terms for a general audience, Kiko, like, because a lot of people don't understand the angles that some of these concepts come from. And so I think it's really important. So I asked those questions kind of already having an idea, but I think the audience will really appreciate knowing like those kind of distinctions, even if there are, I guess, known to us a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So this is the public reaction to the Obama portraits. The internet kind of freaked out for a while, pointing out all of the oddities that are in this picture. There's a spermatozoon in Obama's temple, a very big sperm shape in his temple. Oh, you see it here on the bottom left. There's the sixth finger. What is that? There's also, if you look closely, it looks kind of like he has a vagina rather than the usual male bona fides. So, that was pointed out. Some people argue that you could see a penis. I mean, that's kind of fabulation. Others said that, oh, they repeated the shape of the leaves in different places as if somebody was cheating. They could have been using a projector or something like this, but they made it seem as if it was a problem. And then, sort of nasty memes as well.
Mm-hmm.
And this is my addition to those nasty memes. I think that you could say that the painting makes a reference to this book by Michelle Obama, where Kehinde Wiley might be saying that Michelle Obama, she's serving her favorite meal, Barack Obama being her favorite meal.
Yeah. Okay, so is that confirmed that that was a spermatozoa, or is that just an interpretation?
It's fair to say, as I'm going to show you some spermatozoa in Kehinde Wiley's work.
Oh,
And
okay. So that's
and
that's part of the work.
I don't know if you can see it. There's sort of like a weird vein popping out, and then it sort of gets a little bit thicker where the hairline is.
It does, yeah.
Yeah, so that's kind of a spermatozoa. You can debate it, of course, right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't think Kehinde Wiley said anything about it.
It's definitely abnormal for sure. Like that does not look like.
No, he's having a brain hemorrhage if if this was naturalistic,
Mm-hmm.
So, this is the issue, right? So the Obama portraits, like how can, Obama be person of the year and then Donald Trump be person of the year? So this whole kind of issue, right, was like really driven home in the era of Russiagate. What happened? How did Hillary lose the election, right? We heard about Russiagate for 3 years. WikiLeaks is behind it. Putin's behind it. Trump is Putin's man, all of these kinds of things. And the Democrats leaned very heavily into anti-racism after Trump got elected. So I always point this out. If you look at the exit polls in 2016, identity issues are at around 1% of concern. Economic issues at around 50%. In 2020, with the exit polls, this shifted dramatically with identity issues, especially race issues, jumping up to something like 20%. So that is, you can look at why that happened. Who wrote these questions? Why were the questions changed and more oriented towards race? Obviously, people wanted to get a sense of the pollsters wanted to get a sense of what the public thinks about Black Lives Matter, which were huge protests with 20 million people participating. But nevertheless, you had this shift towards race issues, and now it's come back, right? Now the race issue has declined. I mean, maybe that has something to do with wanting to get Biden reelected. And the economic issues are at the forefront. So these are kind of moving pieces, right? In a game that you like some sort of like 4-dimensional chess match, right? Where you have elements that you can manipulate. So this is the way that this portrait is shown in an exhibition of America's presidents at the National Portrait Gallery. You have the other presidents in that gallery. And just to compare, these are portraits. These are more kind of conservative portraits, you could say, of George W. Bush and what's her name? Mrs. Bush.
Laura?
Yeah, Barbara Bush.
No, Laura Bush.
Oh, Laura Bush. Right. These are portraits by Simi Lee Knox that I mentioned earlier. These are the official Clinton White House portraits. So again, kind of regular in comparison to the Obama portraits. And these are their National Portrait Gallery portraits. I won't go into great detail, but it's been said that the shadow in this portrait of Bill Clinton is a reference to the Monica Lewinsky affair, which shadowed his presidency, making it that he didn't like this painting. But what you see here, and I'll mention this again later, is Bill Clinton sort of like as the family father. He's got the newspaper, so it's like at the end of the day, father knows best, comes home and is going to sit down and read the paper kind of thing. The Hillary Clinton is completely different, though. It's more in this kind of fin de siècle, Art Nouveau sort of style with this gold leaf. And just overall, I'll mention that presidential portraiture tends to not be very challenging in terms of the field of art. It tends to be a very conservative type of representation. One exception is this painting of JFK by Elaine de Kooning. And another is the Theodore Roosevelt that you see at the bottom was painted by a prominent painter of his era, John Singer Sargent. That doesn't make it avant-garde or anything, but it does make it a painting by a very prominent painter. This is the painting of George Washington on the left, and this is the first painting of an American president. And what's distinct about it is that it represents him as a regular person. In other words, as a man of the people. He's not a monarch. He's not represented like a monarch, which is what you would have had if you had George III represented. So that is the sort of idea that carries forward in the painting of Bill Clinton I showed you, as well as the painting of Obama. The other reference is Abraham Lincoln seated in this chair. So that's an obvious reference for the Obama portrait, where you see the entire figure and the entire chair. My interpretation, I don't remember if I read it somewhere, but he's pointing to his eye, and he's seen from the side. So it alludes to the idea that slavery was the blind spot of the American Revolution, and that in a way the presidency of Lincoln, the legacy of the presidency of Lincoln was addressing this blind spot in American life. There's another painting similar to the one of Lincoln called The Peacemakers by George Healy from 1869. So here you see him having a conversation with his Civil War generals. And so that painting has been used in another painting, one of George H.W. Bush, and it's moved around in different places. Different presidents come in and move the art around between different departments or different parts of the White House. So Obama had it moved to the president's dining room, where he would see it on a more regular basis. And and visitors also visiting with him would see it as well. So here's another painting within a painting, portrait of George W. Bush. This is his, I think this is his White House portrait. And it has a painting by Kerner, a guy called W.H.D. Kerner, A Charge to Keep, which was the title of his autobiography. Or is it? Yeah, autobiography. And it's a painting, nobody really knows what it is, from 1916. No one knows for sure, but it could be circuit riders who were Methodist missionaries spreading the gospel. And some people say that this was, in a way, a reference to George Bush's war on terror. So in some ways, it's used as justification for, the practice of bringing democracy to other countries. It brings up, there's no necessary connection, but it does bring up the portraits made by George W. Bush. If you're thinking about presidents and painting and portraiture, these are paintings by George Bush, Tony Blair, and Vladimir Putin, works that were revealed to the public through an email hack. And also some very odd things in that he made. I mean, he made portraits of people like Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden as clowns. He also made paintings of the famous photo of the prisoner at Abu Ghraib. And that, so what you see on the right is a photo from Abu Ghraib where people were tortured by American soldiers. And there's a lot of thumbs ups in these torture portraits. I'm not making a direct link, but when I saw these works come out of Obama with by Terry Richardson, these were just before his election. There's this kind of devil may care, thumbs up, sort of party life side to the picture. But there's also the reality that Obama justified American torture by redacting memos and by not prosecuting any of the people, whether they're soldiers or CIA or private contractors. They were all let off the hook, very much the same way that the people who caused the banking crisis were let off the hook. And so that's where I get the title of the book. Obvious, Too Black to Fail comes from too big to fail banks and too big to jail torturers.
Very clever on your part, because that was a very emblematic statement for the time that was used throughout the Bloomberg, CNBC, all the news networks were using that line. Citigroup was too big to fail. All these different groups they're just too big to fail. The banks were. We had to bail them out. Definitely.
Yeah, and insofar as anti-racism is official ideology, you can debate that and you could say that's not true. But insofar as anti-racism is official ideology, Obama was in some ways too black to fail. He was in some ways, especially for racialists, you could in a way ignore the decisions he made, the decisions his administration took, and you could say Obama was nevertheless a success on these other issues. Just the fact that a black man was elected president has, in the words of Michael Eric Dyson, it has symbolic value.
Yes.
So this symbolic capital, as an art historian, this question of symbolic capital is very interesting, is very much of interest to me. Because when you study art, you can kind of, divide something into parts and look at different facets. And in sociology, there's this concept called cultural capital, which means the more an artist knows about the history of art, the more that their work is informed by that history. So for example, when Picasso made his abstract paintings, it wasn't very popular with the public, but among other artists, painters who were working in the direction of abstraction, it made complete sense. And it was like, wow, we never thought of that. We had done abstraction, but nothing like this, right? So the cultural capital of Picasso is in evidence, which is distinct from the economic capital. So you can have an artist who's excellent, very erudite when it comes to cultural capital, but be very poor. and vice versa. Sometimes art that is made for commercial purposes will have a very low level of cultural capital, but is very well bankrolled, so is paid a lot of money to make something that's more commercial. And so this symbolic capital is what seems to come to the fore around Obama. So that's that's something that Michael Eric Dyson said that I agree with, that makes a lot of sense. So when these are the White House portraits that were made in 2022. So you see Obama in his White House portrait, he chose a style that kind of echoes this Terry Richardson image of him from before 2008 in Vibe magazine. So he kind of went back to that. And in a way, it's a sort of recouping of what was lost with the Kehinde Wiley portrait. It's like, I don't want any background attacking me in this picture, And Michelle Obama, she was a lady of the people with her poplin avant-garde G-band dress the last time, but here she's more in this, I don't know what this is, but it's like a Dior dress. So she's, much more asserting her class status in this image. With regard to George Bush, I just wanted to mention something Michelle Obama said in 2018. And this goes to your idea about the bipartisan collusion. He's my partner in crime at every major thing, where all the formers gather. I love him to death. He's a wonderful man. He's funny. Party doesn't separate us. Color, gender, those kinds of things don't separate us. It's the message we send. And if we're the adults and the leaders in the room and we're not showing that level of decency, we can't expect our children to do the same. So I would say to that, so much for Parker Curry, right? The little 2-year-old girl who's looking up at Obama, like so much for that, It's maybe not for someone else, but from my perspective, it is. And also from the perspective of Emory Douglas, who is the Minister of Culture of the Black Panther Party. He made this image of Barack Obama called Kill Bill Noble Fraud in 2018. And that on the left, obviously, that's the Shepard Fairey stencil that became very well known, Obama Hope. So I'll read a quote. I'm going to have to not read too many, but I'll read this one from Adolph Reed in 1996, pretty early on in Obama's career. He wrote, "In Chicago, we've gotten a foretaste of the new breed of foundation-hatched Black communitarian voices. One of them, a smooth Harvard lawyer with impeccable do-good credentials and vacuous to repressive neoliberal politics, has won a state Senate seat on a base mainly in the liberal foundation and development worlds. His fundamentally bootstrap line was softened by a patina of the rhetoric of authentic community. Talk about meetings in kitchens, small-scale solutions to social problems, and the predictable elevation of process over program." So this quote was at one point circulating among a lot of people on the left. It was quoted many times, and it speaks to the understanding of Adolph Reed, who I would say is one of the leading analysts of race and class issues in the US. So Black power and the neoliberal elite, folded into Ebony magazine, folded into this civil rights magazine tradition, moving more in a neoliberal direction and maintaining the dichotomy that you have since W.E.B. Du Bois defined the idea of double consciousness. So for W.E.B. Du Bois, Blacks somehow never, in the souls of Black folk, he talks about how Blacks never seem to fit in to American society. So you're always torn between these two ideas, one America and the other one being Black. So his solution was the talented 10th. He talked about a 10% elite within the Black community which would do well in various endeavors and in some ways lead Black people to the same level of achievement as anyone else. And so that was an early kind of notion of universalism. A very different one was put forward by Frantz Fanon,
Mm-hmm.
he was a psychoanalyst, and he's well known for a book, Black Skin, White Masks, but he's also known for Wretched of the Earth,
Wretched of
which
the earth.
Wretched of the Earth is a very revolutionary text. It deals with the trauma of colonialism and even the trauma of fighting colonialism and what happens after colonialism once you have control of the country. But in Black Skin, White Masks, he's more interested in psychoanalysis. So he says, in terms of alienation caused by racism, there's two possibilities. One is you ignore race, which is largely Obama's approach, I would say, even though he didn't shy from it in any way, but he would kind of ignore it. And then the other is to find value in racial identity, more of a sort of Black is beautiful, Black nationalist approach.
Mm-hmm.
Fanon argued that both of these, to ignore it or to celebrate it, both are neurotic. And so what he was thinking about is like not a third term, but a different approach to it, which is he referred to as reaching for the universal. So the universality question comes around to, in a way, trouble the Obama legacy and the Obama image, that Obama couldn't be only a president for Black people. And this is a big debate in contemporary issues because a lot of intersectional, decolonial, privilege theory, critical race theory is decidedly against universality. It's perceived as the product of European Enlightenment, the ideas of the 18th and early 19th century. And so with a postmodern approach to difference, there doesn't have to be anything in common among all human beings. You can kind of break it down into material differences and ignore the question of what I was referring to earlier as superstructures. So this is a false understanding of Marxism. Marxism is not about getting rid of superstructures and focusing only on economics, only on matter. Marxism is more about the relationship between those two things. Today, with critical theory, it's gotten very complicated. But one of the approaches is the Judith Butler approach, which
Mm-hmm.
is a critical method that would expose the universal as false. So whenever you say something is normal and everybody thinks that way, for example, then you say, well, no, that's not true. This person doesn't, that person. And if you say that, then who are you promoting more than someone else? Like, are you making yourself invisible, or are you making something else invisible? So for her, the solution to this problem of universality is this ongoing, never-ending exposure of norms of power. So for example, through a drag performance, if you're a male performer, you're not a female performer, but you're pretending to be female, you're acting female, you're exposing how these norms of gender are socially constructed.
Mm-hmm.
The other position is Ernesto Laclau. He's what's known as a radical Democrat. He argued that minority rights can only ever be formulated in relation to universal rights. So you can never have a particularist politics without reference to the universal. But like Judith Butler, he believed that it's always open to renegotiation and constant contestation and exposure, so that you can never occupy the universal, even though you kind of want to, right? That would be sort of what your cultural politics are. And then the alternative to those two is the Zizek position, which is the philosopher Slavoj Zizek, who's using a psychoanalytic perspective, very similar to Frantz Fanon in some respects. And so he argues that there's no particular that isn't already intersected by the universal. The particular always comes out of the universal, and there's a reciprocal implication between them, and they never line up. So yes, there's a constant negotiation, but there can never be a synthesis. There can never be, you can never occupy the space of the universal. So we might argue that whiteness is the universal that functions as an invisible norm. In Canada, for example, we always say French Canadian in Canada if you're French speaking or have a French background. But English Canadians never say they're English Canadians. They don't have to, because it's just assumed if you say Canadian, it means English.
English.
And so French Canadian is the category that is marked different. So this is kind of like the logic that Zizek rejects. He doesn't go in that direction, which is more of a sort of Judith Butler direction on this issue. So there's always a gap between them. Norms can't function in a regulative way. However, the universal, you can't simply fight over it and negotiate it because it's never empty. It's always occupied. And so the concrete universal, how is the universal concretely occupied? I would argue, and he argues, is capitalism. From a Marxist perspective, the universal isn't white supremacy, it's capitalism. And you have capitalism everywhere in the world where people are not white. So you have global capital, and this is the concrete universal that makes every particular an abstract universal. So instead of self and other, where you have the white self and the black other, you have the self being the universal capitalism, and all of the different races, all of the different particulars are all other.
That's
so that
something that's interesting with these slides that you're showing us is and I don't know if you address it like a ton in the book, but it's more so this whole optimization of Obama's blackness, and which plays a lot to society, especially Black society. It creates questions of the nuclear family, the Black male being present in the household, the Black female being by his side. I think that those types of images were like the selling point for Black America when it came to just this enormous turnout for Obama the first time, especially in 08. We know in 12, he lost 3.5 million votes compared to 08. He wasn't nearly as popular at that point, kind of developed and taken off some. But initially, it was almost like he could do no wrong. It was pretty much, it was almost a dream state. Like my dad said, he cried for the first time about anything political, like besides the JFK assassination. Like that was but for completely different reasons. And that type of visual, like what we're seeing here with the Ebony magazine cover, those types of things are almost winning formulas for people who don't even follow politics. Like they don't know anything about the theory. They don't know anything about, they honestly don't even care about the economic circumstance. But they see a picture like this and they're like, that's enough for me to go in there and cast a vote. Like that type of stuff is going back to what we were saying earlier about the intensity of identity politics and the effectiveness of it. But the issue is there's not going to be another Obama. Like, will they be able to create another Obama and Michelle? Will they be able to do that successfully? And I don't think with Kamala that project has been as successful. And so I think that there is a dwindling of that influence.
Yeah, I mean, a Freudian would refer to what you're talking about as the thing, das Ding, the Obama thing, this kind of indescribable, amorphous, I don't know what it is, but it's there. And that's exactly why, that's one of the reasons why Kehinde Wiley is the perfect choice for the Obama paintings, because that's what he looks for when he chooses models for his paintings, and that's what the effect that he wants his paintings to have. So it's, it's that oomph, it's that, that thing that, yeah. And, a lot of us felt that when Obama was elected, right? I was excited when Obama got elected, and I knew the day after, well, the party's over, like now the reality is going to set in, and nobody was really surprised. But you know, the title the word I used in my chapter is from Obama Rama to the drone presidency, and that was Jesse Jackson who made that statement. He was on stage with some other people, and they were elated, and he said, Obama Rama. So, you know, it was like, yeah, right. It was affirmative. And you know, it's why take that away, right? Why eliminate that? But my interest is how that continues, why and how that continues, right? That's kind of what I'm interested in knowing.
Something you said, I don't want to cut you off, but something that you said before I lose the thought, you made a comment about the Bernie, the collusion campaign against Bernie. Both times, obviously, it happened, but in different forms. The second form in 2020 was with the field of candidates, all these incompetent, like mid-average, mediocre candidates, Buttigieg and Warren and Klobuchar and just Beto O'Rourke, all these different people. And you know, at the last second, they're like, okay, I'm going to drop out, you know, and they obviously got a call from somebody, you know, for that to happen. That's not natural to drop out right before Super Tuesday. Like you're going
Yeah,
to drop out before the big event.
Obama called some people, Jimmy Carter, and there's this other person, I forgot his name.
But
Harry
the
Reid.
comment you made about the South Carolina, because you're right, Bernie did win the first three contests. The South Carolina situation was interesting because Jim Clyburn, I know you remember this, Jim Clyburn was the one that said that Joe knows us. So he had to say that being from South Carolina, he had to give his endorsement, being the majority whip. Joe knows us. In other words, you know, he was Obama's right hand man. How can you go against Joe Biden? Even though he has this dude authored the fucking crime bill in 94, started in 1981. He started drafting the crime bill in 1981. This dude authored the crime bill. I know that Clinton signed it, but this dude is responsible for 100,000 more police, for the mandatory minimums, all this stuff that was in there. And it's just like it was almost just shielded away completely because Obama was there, the influence of Obama, the black person, the black face in high place, and Clyburn is saying we can't go against Joe Biden, you know, in this situation. It's too crucial. And it plays on the conservatism in the South. Like you were saying, the blacks in the South, that voting bloc. And I heard a comment the other day in the store. I'm not even making this shit up. I was at a store with my kids and we were just getting like some candy and stuff. And this black dude with the mask on said, y'all got to support the Democrats. Like he screamed in the store. He was probably around 60 years old. Y'all better support the Democrats. Y'all better not support Trump him. And then he just left out of the store. And I thought it was interesting. It pretty much epitomizes a lot of common thought process in the South where honestly, Trump is going to win the state of Tennessee anyway. So I don't know why these people are so delusional to think that the blue side is even going to win the state of Tennessee anyway. But it's just, it goes into that thought process. And these are the same people, unfortunately, you can pretty much, and I'm saying this as a black person, I honestly don't give a damn what people think about me, clearly, with this form. But because a lot of people see Kiko's Freethinker forum, like, is this a black dude? Like people were asked that before they even know who I am. And
Yeah, Biden said that. He said, if you don't vote for me, you're not black.
it's just really funny. But it's sad when you can just, the people that I work with even now sometimes, it's like you should not be able to look at a person and just assume their political orientation. But it's almost like cover to cover, wall to wall, like 3+3=6 type thought process in a lot of these places. When I go into these places, like, yep, that's an Obama supporter. That person is a Democrat, up, down, left, right. And it's just like, why is that even a thing. Why are we so predictable? Like, how is that even possible in 2024 that people are so formulaic in their orientation, even now? But it works apparently. I guess the Democratic Party, um, the marketing has just worked all these years, even though black wealth has not changed at all. If anything, it's gotten worse. The working class within black communities hasn't gotten any better under Democratic Party leadership or Republican leadership. But for some reason, they get this support constantly, you know, and we know where the money's going. We know who gets the benefit from it. You said it yourself. It's the 1 to 10% class. That's really who benefits from all these different policies. But somehow these visual representations are enough to get people in the fold. I guess that's just what we keep going back to that same question again.
Yeah. I mean, in Marxism, there's no necessary connection between class position and class consciousness, right? So people know themselves to be poor, they know themselves to be working class, and they kind of accept that, you know, there's a ruling class, there's the class that profits, and then there's the people who work. So that doesn't necessarily translate into a class formation, which is when you have consciousness of the relationship in society and you organize in different ways through trade unionism, through social movements, through political parties to change that dynamic. But to change that dynamic, you have to change the system itself, right? And this is what Obama was very good at reassuring people. Americans don't want to change the system. And that message resonated with people across the racial divide. People don't really want a revolution. They don't want what Bernie is talking about, which actually they do. When you ask and sort of don't mention political ideology, yeah, I'd like, you know, better wages. Yes, I would like, you know, affordable housing and so on, the entire list. But Obama was good at reassuring people that, you know, in the US, and every American president will say this, this is the American system. It's a system of free enterprise, of entrepreneurialism. It's called the American Creed. And that's what defines us. That's the argument, which of course ignores an entire history of socialism, civil rights, labor struggles in the US. But I mean, that's the message that Obama was hired to give, right?
But it goes into your Bernie Bros Gone Woke book very nicely when you said that younger people are way more open to socialism. And I think that this is Obama, just like most politicians, have capitalized off of the transgenerational shifts. They know that the boomers still have a lot of influence in voting, and even the people before that generation and the Gen Xers, like those three groups themselves have such a powerful presence within the political system still. And people wonder why we can't get people under 70 years old in office. Is because it's that generational shift that we can't get over, because it's like, oh, 38 is too young to be a president, but yet 35 is the requirement, right? That's all you need to meet. But yet we keep talking about experience. I mean, a dude now that's in office now, 50 years of public service, and that's debatable how much service he's actually given to the public. But he's been in office that long, and it's like, does that necessarily mean that that's a good thing? And we always talk about the revolving term limits, just like there's no term limits really for Congress. And it's just so contrarian, that thought process. It's like the young people want something, but then you have this system that is very much set it in stone that discourages like a younger, like revolutionary possibility. Like even if it's young, it's not revolutionary. Like none of the younger people in politics are revolutionary at all. They're still very much a part of the system. And but I just thought that was interesting in your book how you talked about that. Um, Socialism is very much a thing that's fresh for younger people. They haven't been indoctrinated with this post-Cold War thought process, this post-McCarthyism stuff. But it seems like people like my dad's age, my mom's age, they still very much hold those views. Like not my peers per se, but it's still effective around that generation. Those types of thoughts.
Okay. I'm going to answer the question later because I have some slides that might help on that question because a lot of people would answer it in different ways. I have my own sort of spin on some of these issues, but some of the concepts I'm working with to try to figure out exactly what's happening in terms of what you described. One of the terms I'm using is reverse neoliberal colorblindness. Another one I'm using is embedded history. Another one I'm using is post-representation. And these are kind of efforts to try to grasp, the things that are not necessarily new in the situation that have been there a long time. The American electoral system is very complicated and convoluted, right? But that doesn't mean that you're not getting the same thing in the US than in a different country where the system is like in Canada, we only have a 3-month election. And people vote more for parties than they do for a presidential figure, right? So it's like it's not exactly the same thing, but we have the same result. So, looking at it from a political perspective is part of the answer. And what I'm trying to do here is argue for the co-implication of cultural issues along with political issues, so that it's not that once you clear the cobwebs of the cultural issue, you can finally arrive at the political issue. I'm arguing that there's something ideological that's kind of, part of the mechanism, let's say, of politics. But one of them would be, and I'll get to this later, has to do with what I call petty bourgeois hegemony. So that's kind of a complicated idea, but I have a graph for that hopefully can help make it more, easier to visualize.
I appreciate that.
I
Because I
make
know my
graphs.
audience is like, what the hell is that? Petty bourgeois hegemony.
Yeah, it helps me too, because once I've made a graph, I usually kind of like work with it for a while, maybe indefinitely if it's still applicable. And it's always a problem if you're doing history. So Amy Sherald, the painter of the Michelle Obama picture, she was lionized in the media, obviously, if you're going to make a portrait of Michelle Obama. But what's interesting is that these two artists were lionized in ways that other portrait painters are not. Like even the ones who did the Obama portraits for the White House, they didn't get all of this special attention. So here she is on a website being identified as Vanguard, newly established. And these are the kinds of paintings that Amy Sherald was making before the Michelle Obama Commission. So this is her standard style, where she uses a gray skin tone, something that she came across somewhat accidentally as an underlayer, but she decided to stick with it because she thought that in a way it acknowledges race, but de-emphasizes it. And with these like plain backgrounds, so that's two more of the same. I don't have a lot to say about Amy Sherald. I prefer the Michelle Obama portrait to the Obama portrait if you had to ask me about it. But I don't have a lot to say about her practice. It's very straightforward. There's no surprises really in Amy Sherald painting, except for the titles. She has unusual titles that are some of them written by her sister, so very long. Do I have one here? What's precious inside of him does not care to be known by the mind in ways that diminish its presence. So that's the one on the right. This is a reference for both artists, I would say, a painting by Barclay Hendricks. I'm not going to go here into a lot of or any other Black American painters, but this is one I would say that definitely had an influence on both of them, I would argue. They may not think as much of it as I do. This is a portrait painted of himself by Kehinde Wiley on the cover of Flaunt magazine. And on the right, you see like a very good example of what he did a lot of for a while, not exclusively, but a lot of these types of paintings. So what he's doing is he's finding Black models on the street. He goes kind of scouting like a film, a director looking for an unknown actor on the street. And he looks for somebody who has this kind of macho swagger type posture. And what he likes is that very often these are poor people who don't necessarily have a lot of power, but they act and project a lot of machismo, which is part of street culture and street fashions. So that's kind of what he's looking for often in some of his models. And then he takes a well-known painting from a museum. This one is based on Frans Hal's painting, so from the 1600s, a Dutch painter. But you have the pose from the past, but you have a Black sitter. And so you're introducing a Black figure in the canon of art history, Western art history, which is almost always white sitters, white figures. So here's this guy who's kind of a well-to-do person and with contemporary clothes. So he's wearing Sean John sportswear and Timberland boots. And you have the same kind of foliage that's coming out from the background and covering the figure. And I mean, I could go on really at length about Kehinde Wiley, but I'll probably leave out a lot of things. On the right is a series that he made with cultural figures. This is Spike Lee.
Mhm.
And so this series that he made is from 2014. So let's see. Yeah, so that's just before the Obama portraits. And it's made in partnership with Grey Goose Vodka. When they released a new flavor called Le Melon, which is a flavor that was once beloved by the French aristocracy. So you have here kind of something like the film Chevalier, if you saw that film. You have a series that celebrates Black achievement. It's placing it in this very rarefied context, but at the same time, very easily understood, right? So it's kitsch, technically speaking, but it's of a high quality. So it's kind of like a corporate kitsch. And that's him there in Time magazine and celebrated by LL Cool J as, in his words, to put it simply, he does dope shit. He's created a visual brand that remains artistically fresh, and his many paintings in the Smithsonian speak to his genius. So this is Kehinde Wiley celebrated as one of the 100 most influential people. So, there's he's taking a language for art that comes from hip hop, essentially.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. Mm-hmm.
And he's bringing that into the art canon, into the art world. And you have celebrities. I mean, Spike Lee is a celebrity, but it's popular culture, right? Everybody knows Spike Lee. But at the same time, he's like the most prominent African-American filmmaker in the US. So it's like celebrity, whatever you want to call it, upper tier recognizability. So the street, in a way, the main street combines with Wall Street, in paintings that are supported by a brand, in this case, Grey Goose, which is associated, if I'm not mistaken, with Bacardi. I think it's a Bacardi brand. So he's, it's the struggle over the sign that I was referring to earlier, not a struggle over the superstructure in this Marxist sense, but in a postmodern sense, a struggle over the sign. So it's no longer about economy and class. It's more about race as a signifier within the class structure. It doesn't have a Marxist, it doesn't have a revolutionary Black Panther activist, Black Marxist significance. It's completely, in that regard, status quo, making it into the hierarchy. And he fully admits that. He doesn't shy away from that. And in fact, he argues that we should be moving away from this kind of avant-garde modernist critique of commercialism. We should be embracing it, commercialism, because it's fun. He likes it. It's not, for him, this is less pretentious than avant-garde modernist or museum art that people can't relate to.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a combination of populism with elitism, which I'm arguing is the perfect formula that the Democrats have developed that Nancy Fraser refers to as progressive neoliberalism, where if you're diverse, if you're woke, you don't need to question Wall Street. You don't need to question what the Pentagon is doing. Somehow they all sort of mesh.
It's I was thinking about, because I follow a lot of old archives of Malcolm X, and Malcolm X had already commented on this stuff back in the 50s and 60s about the use of celebrity to promote political agendas. And I mean, he was very correct in his assessment. If you go back and watch some of and listen to some of Malcolm X's interviews and speeches, he's describing everything today to a T. The use of the NBA to promote whatever political agenda, the Black Lives Matter on the court, whether and you alluded to this yourself when the players threatened to not play, and then Obama came in and said, "You guys need to play the games and finish it out." And regardless of the protesting going on behind George Floyd, and just the effectiveness of that celebrity, even and Bernie tried this too, to a lesser extent, but he did do it. He tapped into it. He had Killer Mike the rapper, I think the first time in 2016, and then Cardi B endorsed Bernie in 2020, the rapper Cardi B out of New York. So he tried to capitalize to a smaller extent off of that celebrity. But I mean, Hillary Clinton, the first time in 2016 against Trump, I mean, she brought out all the heavyweights. I mean, Lady Gaga, Jay-Z, Beyonce. I mean, basically anyone you could think of that's a celebrity. Did she just go through like a directory and it's like, okay, let me see, that's a black celebrity. Shit, let me get them on. Let me get these people on. It almost seemed like she just handpicked these people to come like promote her or something. I don't know, but it just it goes into everything you're talking about in your Obama Portraits book. Just these images are, I will say that these images are amazing. I think the audience is going to get a great joy just watching this PowerPoint slide, because regardless of what you think about the politics of these people, I mean, the art is really something. It's a wonder to see some of these images.
Right. And I mean, the question I'll get to this too is, like, these images have a lot of symbolic capital. There's a lot of economic capital behind them, but is there a lot of cultural capital? I would say no. There's not a lot of cultural capital. You don't need a lot of art history to appreciate these paintings.
Mm-hmm.
So in that regard, they're very close to what sociologist Pierre Bourdieu refers to as the field of power. And hip hop and street fashions like knockoff Louis Vuitton handbags, you know, that has that kind of like immediate, power signifier, bling kind of like, I get it. If you see a guy with tattoos and a big gold chain, and he's got the walk, and he's got a fancy car, a shiny car, like, you get the picture, you understand it right away. It's not very rarefied. It's very street, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is kind of like this symbolic capital. And in terms of celebrities, I get into a lot of the issues of branding and celebrity. Malcolm X, if you compared him to an athlete, you could compare him to Muhammad Ali. Barack Obama, if you compared him to an athlete, you'd compare him to Tiger Woods.
Mm-hmm.
A very different proposition when it comes to politics and Black politics, right? One is revolutionary, the other one, whatever, we don't know, it's not important. And in the field of celebrity studies, there's a distinction made between celebrification and celebritization. Celebrification is when somebody is known for something that achieved something important, like Martin Luther King. You can have a holiday named after Martin Luther King because he did something, he stands for something. Celebritization is somebody becoming famous, but without having any reason for it, right? So that doesn't mean they're not a celebrity, they're known by everyone, but what they do is it really important in terms of the history of humanity? Maybe not. And maybe in 100 years, we'll still have an MLK holiday, but we won't have a Barack Obama holiday, in this distinction.
I hope not.
I'm sure there's a bronze statue somewhere already beside, the ones that you just mentioned, Oprah, Jay-Z, and all those guys, and Tom Hanks. I'm sure there's a bronze statue of Tom Hanks somewhere. So this is some of the background work for Kehinde Wiley. He made a lot of paintings of people that look like saints. So in the pose of religious figures. So there's this whole kind of campy sort of, nunsploitation, this kind of like saintsploitation, because it's all about homoerotic identification. And that is used in this painting called Mugshot of a young boy, a young youth, early 20s or something. And it's a police identification picture that he found on the street somewhere and that he turned into a portrait. And so for him, based on what he says, this is the structure of all of his paintings. So, you have the idea of wanted, but by who? By the police. So that in a way, the figure is a victim. But nevertheless, the figure is one that maybe you want to redeem in some ways. So this is a person caught in circumstances that is a good kid, but that is in a bad situation. And in a way, that's kind of what he's saying about his own portraiture. I've got good people in a bad situation, which is they're in my painting. So it's kind of like, it's this sort of, it's this, The Great Game, the novel by Leonard Cohen, which is about sexuality, sexuality as sport. And so in this more sort of extravagant version, celebrities, Michael Jackson and Ice-T, in the pose of Napoleon in the painting by Ingres, and Michael Jackson in the pose of Philip II in a painting by Rubens. So, one of the statements made about Kehinde Wiley, why people like him, is he makes Black people look like winners.
Mm-hmm.
So they're conquerors. And there's some art historical references for this kind of work as well. This is one based similar to the painting by David, who was involved in the French Revolution, made a painting of Napoleon, used here for Napoleon leading the army over the Alps by Wiley, 2005. So an unnamed African-American in this case. Some of the meaning in this references slavery. So he's talking about conquest and bondage at the same time. And so how do you escape this tradition of bondage? One way is you have to go through it. Like you got to go through the 0 degree of the legacy of slavery in some ways, and you carry with you those markers, but as someone who's triumphed over them. But it all has not so much historical context. You can say there's historical context, but what there is instead of text, context, where you understand the work by studying its context. You have text, subtext. So instead of context, which is a study of history, you have gay subtext, which places the work in the register of eroticism instead. And so here, just on this theme of spermatozoa, You have little sperms in the painting in the background and in the cartouche also in the frame. So I'll just go back there so you could see the cartouche and you see the pattern in the background. So, you have these details. And this is where the idea comes from for the spermatozoa in Biden's temple. Sorry, Obama's temple.
And those are
And
clearly like, those look way more like spermatozoa right there. Um,
yeah, there's pubic hairs also in his work. And Kehinde Wiley doesn't hide that from anyone. It's not something, that's secret or anything like that. And he operates like a fashion house. A fashion house comes up with lines every season. So, he comes out with lines of paintings, a series of paintings. And one of the things that he did is he did a world series. So he went around the world and he took the same approach that he did with African American male models, but he did it in different countries. And he sets up studios in those countries. So he has assistants making his paintings. So the more he works, the less time he's putting into each of his paintings in terms of, these being a painting by him. So he's working more like Michelangelo used to do, in the Renaissance. He does the outlines. His assistants do most of the work, and then he might come in after and do touch-ups if there's something he doesn't like. So this is in China, and it's modeled on posters and images from the Chinese Cultural Revolution and other kinds of references that he uses, for inspiration in his paintings. This is from a series called Down. So these are real women.
mhm,
Gives you a sense of the scale. So these are billboard size paintings of gay men on the down low. So
mhm.
these are kind of like the counterpoint to his conquering figures. These are more like conquered figures. So they're sort of more relaxed, and in a way they're the prey of the successful game.
Now I see where you're talking about the black masculinity stuff really coming in for
Yeah,
sure. Yeah,
totally.
this is definitely kind of in my wheelhouse.
Yeah, there's and for Kehinde Wiley, the way he talks about these things is that he's post everything. So he's post black, like Obama was post black. He's post blackness, and he's post gender. So what he's more interested is in ambiguity, not having a definite meaning to something. Um, and as I mentioned, he's post everything except post capitalism. That one that doesn't figure. So these are just other examples. He did stained glass and other media, and he did sculpture, bronze, but as cast resin pieces that are more affordable as well. For what it's worth, this is on the left one of my favorite Kehinde Wiley pieces. I don't know why I like that. Maybe because I'm a runner.
New Balance.
Maybe.
I like, yeah, New Balance with the balance on the head. That's pretty clever.
Yeah, it refers to neo-colonial. Oh no, not neo-colonial. Neoclassical sculpture from the late 17, early 1800s. So at that point, blacks don't have freedom. In the US, it's still a slave situation. So he's talking about slavery, but he's talking about slavery vis-a-vis brands and
Mhm.
like consumer culture and that sort of thing. These are potential influences for his work. So this is a photographer from Mali called Seydou Keita, and his student Malik Sibide. So you see this kind of use of plain backgrounds is, has antecedents in representation. A more well-known one in the context of the US are these photographs by Carl Van Vechten, this one of W.B. Du Bois and Eartha
For
Kitt.
the kid.
And Van Vechten is a white photographer who was involved in the Harlem Renaissance. He's famous for a novel called Nigger Heaven, which
Hmm.
some people don't like because it was treating Harlem as this kind of like space for slumming, for white people. But at the same time, he was definitely part of the scene. He wasn't simply detached, right? So there's this kind of like negotiated gazes. And the way that Carl van Vechten worked in these spaces, with the advantage that he may have had in relation to some people, but not others, is sort of what appeals to Kehinde Wiley, moving into spaces, having those advantages, but also negotiating questions of power. So this is the kind of fodder that postmodernists in academia love to deal with. You know, you can write millions of essays on power and the gaze and who has the upper hand and what's going on here and who's being undermined. It's kind of like a soap opera. It's melodrama, you know. And a lot of TV shows, you can make a lot of TV shows around these topics.
Like you said, just countless topics. I mean, it's just like the publications just pile on and on and on because there's always an angle you can analyze. There's so many different lenses to it.
Everybody has a story, right?
Everybody has a story.
And that's what postmodernism celebrates. The phrase that's used is petite histoire, little stories, minor narratives, not the meta narrative of class struggle or of psychoanalysis, but minor narratives. So these are figures obviously represent this. This might be on the more personal side, maybe on the more private side of his photography, but definitely influential in terms of contemporary, sexuality in gay male representation. There's a French duo, Pierre et Gilles. So they're working with this kind of nunsploitation, monksploitation to relate sexuality and race. Robert Mapplethorpe, very well known, especially insofar as a retrospective of his work was attacked by the Republican right at a certain time in the early 1990s. So, people defended what Mapplethorpe wanted to do was bring pornography into high art. So taking pornographic subject matter, but representing it in a very formal way so that it could work in an art register. This is the opposite of what Kehinde Wiley is trying to do. He's trying to not make his work look like pornography. So it kind of maybe begins around that, sort of, but not necessarily, and then, is doing something else. Maybe something more like this artist, Awal Erizku, with a photograph that quotes Vermeer on the left and one that quotes Caravaggio on the right. So these are both European artists who would have had white sitters, but in this case, they're Black subjects. And when it comes to quoting art, this is, of course, a European tradition. This is a Manet painting, which is an Impressionist painting, which is a quote of a 1515 engraving. So the difference between a Manet, who's a modernist artist, and Kehinde Wiley, who's a postmodern artist, is that when Manet did this was scandalous. People were like, the perspective is wrong, the woman is naked, but she's with contemporary people, which doesn't make her look like a classical Greek figure. It makes her look like maybe a prostitute with these two bourgeois men in the park. So that was like a scandalous thing at that time. It wouldn't be for somebody today quoting art, even if it's got sexual material. So this is Kehinde Wiley working with the Puma brand. These are legends of sport for the FIFA World Cup. So these are soccer players. And so there's a lot of discussion about brand and the brand of America. If a politician is a candidate, if they're a brand, what is it that they're being aligned with? Are they being aligned with the public, like Bernie Sanders with his slogan, "Not me, us"? Or are they aligning with the Democratic Party? Is that what's being branded? Or is it the United States as the number one superpower? So these are things that candidates would negotiate. And before he made the painting of Obama, Kehinde Wiley was given an award as a brand ambassador for the United States. by something in government. So Obama had met Kehinde Wiley in the past. And so he uses this language to talk about his work. There's branding with Kehinde Wiley patterns on Puma sportswear. And this is his portrait of LL Cool J, which was mimicked by a Guinness in their Africa advertising with a hip hop musician from Africa. I can't remember his name. So this is getting into the sort of like sociology where you have, this is Bourdieu's sociology. I'm going to go very quickly, but if you look at the top left, you would see consecrated avant-garde artists, like the painting you see on the right, on the top right, this kind of abstract Russian avant-garde type stuff, very unpopular with the public. Even at the time when it was made in Russia to support the revolution, it was unpopular with the average person at that time. Of course, now we know it more from art history. And in the middle in this graph, you have the large scale production, but more commercial, like vaudeville and serial journalism, for example. And then you have more like the bohemian avant-garde, art for art's sake, which has a high degree of cultural capital, but it's not necessarily as rarefied as the consecrated avant-garde. So on the right, these are works that are tongue-in-cheek, made by two artists, Komar and Melamed, where they used polls to find out what people like in art. And so based on statistical polling information, people don't like abstract geometric paintings. They do like landscapes with George Washington and deer and families in them. And they don't like red, but they do like blue. So they generated paintings in this way. And you could argue, I would argue, so does Kehinde Wiley. When he did his World Series, he found an article in the Wall Street Journal talking about how brands are popular, like American brands and sports brands are popular globally, though they have a different inflection locally. So he thought, that's a good idea. I'm going to take my hip hop American stuff and translate it into different contexts. So he's working with branding concepts in order to generate his art. So it's very high on the economic capital, and it's very low on the cultural capital. As far as, modernism is concerned, postmodernism says you don't have to worry about that. Go with the branding, go with the polls and the statistics, and generate, whatever. Can you let me know how we're doing on time?
Yes, I was just going to say we'll probably have to have Dr. Mark back on at another time. I'm thinking June, because I definitely I have places to go, unfortunately. But I do want to give you like a chance to address my audience, like the final minute or so, and then we can definitely pick this up and continue this. I'm thinking in June we can focus a little bit more on the Bernie Bros Gone Woke, and also another book that we discussed off air, Identity Trumps Socialism: The Class and Identity Debate After Neoliberalism. And then again, the other book is Bernie Bros Gone Woke: Class, Identity, Neoliberalism. And anything that we recuperate from this episode too, we can also address in June as well. If you'd be open to come back onto the show, which I think you would be.
Yeah, I would be for sure. And thanks for mentioning those other projects. So I'm just going to rifle through this really quickly, since
Okay.
the next time around we probably won't look at the paintings or the images. So I'm just going to, but this is my thing where I'm talking about the petty bourgeois way of seeing the world having supplanted the bourgeois. So it speaks to the prominence. Petty bourgeois is kind of, well, anyways, we can talk about it the next time, but it's sort of like the working class has become more like the middle class, and the upper class has become more like the middle class as well. So culture is more in the middle today than it used to be. So we don't have high culture like we used to, but at the same time, everyday people have more knowledge of culture. So that's kind of what this boils down to. And so just going real quick, this is a ceiling that he made with hip hop breakdancers.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just comparing it to another ceiling made at the same time by Adidas. So you see, there's kind of like, there's not it's not a real, stretch to go from a Kehinde Wiley painting to something that's happening in popular culture. This done for a Subway by Adidas, right? So this is completely commercial illustration. It has no like museum meaning or value.
Mm-hmm.
Or sports athletes on the Sistine Chapel in a Sports
Yes, I
Illustrated
was about to say the
issue,
Sistine Chapel.
right? So you can appropriate the canon for different purposes. Mariah Carey as a Fragonardian nymph, um, the Sistine Chapel selling Lay's potato chips. Um, hip hop in the 80s, the whole shift in the 80s from like concern with everyday people going into this Cosby show, different strokes kind of upscale stuff. So even if it's just bling, even if it's not, really rich, using names like MC Duke, right? And so emphasizing this kind of royalty in the hip hop scene, going from fresh to more militant in the
Oh
hip
yeah.
hop scene, going more gangster. I call this Reagan noir, this kind of like crime, a focus of hip hop and gangsta. You have Grandmaster Flash here selling Louis Vuitton, branding, branding Black Power in terms of the Black Panther Party in a movie with
Mhm.
um, Michael Jordan, who was in Black Panther, and being on here in GQ. So sort of selling signifiers of revolution, but very much in a context of capitalist
Mhm.
progressive neoliberalism. Some Afrofuturism, some Michael Jackson, the richest man in music, um, and all of this kind of clothing that signifies wealth and quasi-futuristic, quasi-military, protective gear. Now used in videos extensively. A lot of representation. That's Usher and Michael Williams from the TV show. I can't remember the Wire. A
Mhm.
lot of reference to royalty in this kind of zone. Cardi B. This is a cover of Santigold's album. The background is a painting by Kehinde Wiley of Santigold. So she's there in different guises, and he made a painting for this. So you see the crossover, right, between different realms, music, hip hop, painting, contemporary art, going into cinema. Some references here, Jackson Pollock in Life magazine, Jackson Pollock's paintings being used to sell Dior dresses. The photographer, Cecil Beaton, photographing celebrity, Elizabeth the first. This goes into fashion and it mixes all in all of these kinds of signifiers. Um,
Oh
Cross-platform.
guys. Oh wow. Before Night Falls, Ronaldo Arenas.
Yeah, great filmmaker, Steve McQueen, but who started off as a visual artist. Same thing with, Schnabel, an artist sculptor who made films. So Kehinde Wiley is doing the same thing. He's moving into cinema, so cross-platforming. So it's got more to do with like managing creativity in this neoliberal sense, maybe almost like a neo-Renaissance sense, where you've got like the church and the crown sponsoring these artists. So you've got Hollywood with billion-dollar films or whatever, multi-million dollar films. Um, you have hip hop artists and musicians who they become so wealthy that they become businessmen, expanding
Mhm.
their wealth by investment. Um, and the celebration of all this in postmodern art on the left by has this been changed? I don't recognize this guy. Anyways, Moses Malone.
Moses
Uh,
Malone, yeah, he passed away a couple years ago.
okay. So
Yeah.
this is a Nike ad, right? Moses Malone. And it was taken by Jeff Koons, who's a postmodern artist, and presented as his own work. So it's appropriation work. And it sells for like $200,000. So it's the same
Oh
poster.
wow.
It's the same poster, but it's in a frame and presented by Jeff Koons. So I'm just mentioning this as the kind of postmodern art where, commercialism becomes part of the game. Um, cross-platforming again, Bo Jackson, who is a multi-talented athlete, also a scientist. Embedded history, the idea that, you know, this game between the GOP and the Democrats, it's kind of like a sports match, as if sports matches, as if they change history instead of just passing the ball back and forth. Woke branding, woke advertising, McDonald's International Women's Day, Burger King with the
Pride Walk,
where you get 2 tops or 2 bottoms. Canadian painter, Monkman. Geez, did I say his name right? I better get his name correct. I'm there. Yeah, Kent Monkman, expelling the vices. So he's doing something similar to Kehinde Wiley, but in his case, it's indigenous issues. It's not Black issues. So he's going in this tradition of landscape painting, American landscape painting, but introducing indigenous content, also of a homoerotic subject matter. A very different kind of artist, Yinka Shoni Barre, who's also referencing art history, but he's dealing with the difficulties of history with this reference to Goya's Los Caprichos. So, you know, the sleep of reason begets monsters, you know, imperialism. How is it that we accept the genocide going on in Gaza? These kinds of questions, they can't appear in a painting that has Puma as a sponsor, right? It's just not the kind of, it could have happened. Once upon a time, Benetton was doing that kind of disaster advertising. So you may find it again, but in today's context, with all of this fake sensitivity around issues, like you can't have solidarity with Palestine because that's anti-Semitic. You get all these kinds of twisted logics that are at play. And in the book, I also mentioned this piece by 2 artists, Annie Begg and Elise MacLeod, based on a novel from 1402, The City of Ladies. So it's also using historical reference, but it's a video and it's young women discussing political issues and talking in the video with leading feminist scholars. So that, you know, you can have a lot of the same elements in terms of form, but have a completely different message. So there's, you know, the things that Kehinde Wiley is doing in this postmodern way are what I call progressive neoliberalism. So now I got through the images, and thanks so much for giving me the time to do that.
No problem. Dr. Léger, are there any final words that you have for my audience? If a audience member had a question or a comment, what would be the easiest way to get in touch with you?
Well, you can email me if you have a question or comment, leger.mj@gmail.com. And I have a academia webpage. Academia is a site for scholars where you can post articles. So a lot of my work is on my academia page, and you can reach me through that page. The book is published by Red Quill Books, but it's available through other distributors online. So if you just type in, you know, Léger, Too Black to Fail, you'll find a link to some site, or you could go directly to Red Quill Books. But I think actually, if you go there, they're going to direct you to Amazon.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So if you don't want to buy from Amazon, then, you know, like just Google the title and you might find different distributors.
But I'm sorry, I have to cut it short. I mean, it's technically not that short because it's almost a 3-hour conversation. But I just want to say thanks again for coming on to the show. We would definitely follow up. I'm very interested in having another interview. I can't wait for the next time for us to have that conversation. And I know my audience is going to be super excited too. Very interesting stuff. I'm going to link all the information in the episode description as far as your books and your biographical information. so the audience can have that information at their disposal. I want to say thanks again, Dr. Léger, for coming onto the show. And beautiful people, episode 118 did not disappoint. And I'm sure that the following episodes are going to be just as great. Enjoy the rest of your day, beautiful people. And we will talk to y'all soon. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Kiko. I'm happy to come back and talk to you some more. And
No, we can't wait to have you back on. It's going to be fun.
thanks for your comments. It's very important to discuss these issues because these are serious issues with serious impact on people's lives. So I appreciate your show, and you've got a lot of great guests on your show. And so I look forward to discovering more of your show.
Thank you so much. We will see y'all soon. Tomorrow, I can't tell you who we're going to have on. We got so many people coming up. But anyway, just stay tuned to the show, and we will keep the episodes coming and the guests coming as well. Talk to you all soon, and we will see each other tomorrow. Bye-bye.